My name is Mike Cohen. I'm currently breathing in the smoggy, ambitious air of 2004, an era where every street feels like a portal to a fortune if you only know which key to turn. In my previous life, I was a ghost, a man who lived in the shadow of his own failures. I hit the jackpot once, $8 million. It was supposed to be the ticket out of the gutter for my family. Instead, my wife, Megan, snatched $7, $9 million off it, leaving me with pennies. When my parents fell ill, she didn't just refuse to pay. She called them a burden and kicked them to the curb. She wanted a prince, and I was just the peasant who had accidentally stumbled upon a treasure chest. But that was then. This is now. I stood outside the Lingen restaurant, my heart rate steady. I knew exactly what was happening inside. My soon-to-be brother-in-law, Luke, was having a blind date, and I was the designated wallet. I could feel the cold, sharp memory of that day. The day my father broke his leg at work and received reparations, only to have the money swindled away to cover Luke's gambling debts, not this time. In this life, I'm not just a man with a lottery ticket. I'm a man with a roadmap. I'm going to take that $8 million and turn it into $80 million, then $800 million. I'm going to set my life ablaze, and this time, the heat won't burn me. It'll incinerate anyone who tries to stand in my way. I walked into the private room. The atmosphere was stifling. Megan looked at me with that familiar, predatory smile she wore whenever she needed money. "You're late," she snapped, not even bothering to stand. "Luke is here. Pay the bill. It's $13,200. I looked at the table, the remains of an excessive feast. I'm not paying. The silence was instant. Luke, the brother who had leeched off me for years, tuition, rent, pocket money, stopped chewing. Megan's face reddened. "Mike, are you losing your mind?" she hissed. "We're family. Luke is your future brother. It's just a meal." "He's your brother, Megan," I said, my voice cold enough to drop the temperature in the room. "And I'm done being the ATM." Megan tried to pivot. She always did. "Fine, skip the meal. Let's talk about the wedding gift. I need an extra $200,000. It's for sincerity," she knew. She knew my father had the reparations money. She had been salivating over that cash since the day he got his leg broken. "You want $200,000 to cover Luke's pyramid scheme's debts?" I asked, watching hairy eyes widen. "You think I don't know he's facing jail time?" "It's my brother," she shrieked. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the rotting core of her character. "You kicked my father out on New Year's Eve, Megan." It was snowing. "He walked miles on a broken leg because you didn't want him in your house. And now you want his blood money? Are you paying or not?" she demanded, her voice an ultimatum. "We're over," I said, turning on my heel. "You'll regret this," she screamed as I walked out. "You're nothing without me." I didn't head home. I headed to the antique district. I had a target, the Sherman Treasure Bowl. In my previous life, it sat in a dusty shop for a month before being sold for $80 million. I walked into the shop owned by a man named Liam. There it was, dingy, coated in grime, sitting on a shelf like a piece of junk. "How much for the bowl?" I asked. Liam laughed, sneering at me. $300,000. He was trying to rob me, thinking I was a desperate fool. I didn't care. I slapped the money on the counter. The look on his face was worth every cent. I walked out of the shop, bowl in hand, and bumped straight into Megan and her new rich boyfriend, Liam. "Look who it is," Megan sneered. "The broke loser who couldn't afford my wedding gift. Did you spend your last dollar on that piece of garbage?" "It's worth more than your entire family," I replied. "A bowl?" Liam chuckled. "It's worth maybe $200. You've been scammed, Mike." I ignored them. I knew what lay beneath the mud. I knew the history. I knew the future. As I walked away, I felt the first real surge of power I'd ever had. The lottery ticket hadn't hit yet, but my investments were already in motion. The Oracle of Jarrell wasn't just a nickname. It was my new reality. Would you like me to continue with chapters 6 through 10, where Mike begins to manifest his wealth and humiliate his ex-family? I stood at the center of the antique district, the dingy bowl still wrapped in rue brown paper. A crowd had begun to gather, drawn by the pathetic sight of Megan and her boyfriend. Liam are mocking me. "Look at him," Liam jeered, his chest puffed out with the arrogance of a man who thought his bank account made him a god. "He's so broke he's trying to flip garbage to make his rent." "Give it up, Mike. You're a peasant. You'll always be a peasant." I didn't answer. I simply set the bowl on a nearby display stand and pulled out a bottle of water. I poured it over the grime-caked surface, using my thumb to scrub away the decades of dust. "What are you doing?" Megan asked, her voice faltering as she saw the sheen beneath the dirt. As the mud washed away, a brilliant, unmistakable glow emerged. It wasn't just gold, it was a deep, royal radiance. Then I flipped it over. The base was inlaid with rare violet amethysts that spelt out Sloan, the mark of therichest man of the Marin era. The chatter in the crowd died instantly. Even Liam's smug face turned the color of ash. Mr. Cohen, a veteran appraiser who had been watching the spectacle from the sidelines, pushed through the crowd. He pulled a jeweler's loupe from his pocket, his hands trembling as he hovered over the bowl. It can't be," Cohen whispered. He looked up at me, his eyes wide. "This Isa national treasure. It's the royal bowl of Wade Sloan. It's priceless. If I had to put a number on it today, it's $60 million. In 20 years, it could be billions." Megan's jaw hit the floor. Her face went from mocking to a mask of pure, unadulterated greed. She lunged for the bowl. "Mike!" "Oh, honey, I was just testing you. We're still a couple, right? We can split this. We can get married today." I stepped back, letting her grab nothing but air. "My youth was worth $250,000 to you, Megan. Remember, I'm not interested in your company anymore, and I'm certainly not interested in your greed." Chapter 8. The bet Liam, seeing his chance to save face, shouted, "It's a fluke. You just got lucky at a garage sale. Real finance isn't about luck, it's about connections. You want to bet?" I asked, my voice calm. "Name it," Liam spat. "I have $60 million in assets right here. Let's bet on the gemstone Expotamoro," I said. "Whoever finds the higher value in raw stones wins." The crowd gasped. $60 million was a fortune that could topple the local market. Liam hesitated, but the presence of the wealthy onlookers pushed him into a corner. "Fine. You're on. I'll make you beg for mercy." The next day, at the Gemstone Expo was like entering a den of vipers. Men in tailored suits moved with surgical precision, whispering about margins and yield percentages. Liam and his circle of tycoons picked stones with high-quality markings, boasting about their connections and insider data. I walked straight past their displays and headed to the back. The waste pile. It was a bin of jagged, unremarkable rocks that the staff used for decor. I paid $1 for the entire pile. "He's lost it," someone whispered. "He's trying to bet against millions with pebbles." I didn't argue. I just called the stonemason over. "Cut these," I said. The first stone was cut. A gasp erupted. A ruby, deep and clear. Then the Skand, an ice-core gem. By the time the stonemason reached my last stone, the room was deathly silent. The saw bit into the rock, and a brilliant, blinding shade of green emerged. "Imperial green emerald," the stonemason choked out, his voice cracking. "It's a vein of pure imperial green. This is a fortune beyond imagining." I looked over at Liam. His face was a pale, sweating ruin. He had bet his dignity, his pride, and his capital against me, and he had lost everything in a hurtite. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. I just watched him realize that the broke loser he had mocked was now the man holding the keys to his future. Should I continue with Chapter 11, where Mike begins his real rise to power, or would you like to see how he handles the oracle reputation in high society? The atmosphere in the exhibition hall shifted from condescending amusement to terrified reverence. Liam stood frozen, his eyes darting between the shimmering imperial green emerald and the pile of dull rocks that had yielded it. He looked like a man who had just realized he'd walked into a meat grinder. "Check the math again," Liam stammered to his assistant. "There's no way. It's a scam. He's using rigged stones." "Mr. Jean," I said, my voice cutting through the hall like a razor, "if you were going to be a sore loser, at least be a quiet one. The notary has already verified the stones. The bet is settled." The notary, a man of impeccable reputation, nodded toward me. "Mr. Cohen has one. Total value of the stones exceeds $200 million. The room erupted. Investors who moments ago were laughing at my pebbles were now scrambling to get my business card. I wasn't just a lucky guy with a Belanimore. I was the oracle. Just as I was about to collect my winnings, a cold voice came from the back of the crowd. "Impressive show, Cohen, but don't mistake luck for status." Tate Colson, the heir to the Colson dynasty, stepped into the light. He looked like he'd been carved out of marble, cold, expensive, and utterly detached from the reality of the people around him. He was the man Megan had been desperately trying to pivot toward after she dumped me. "A few rocks don't make you a player in Jarrell," Tate continued, a sneer playing on his lips. "You're an outsider. You're playing with money you aren't equipped to hold. You might want to hand back some of those winnings before you find yourself in an alleyway with no one to claim you." I looked at him, unimpressed. "The difference between you and me, Tate, is that you're worried about where I fit in your hierarchy. I'm worried about how long it will take for your entire company to hit the bottom." Later that night, I met with Greg Summer, the city official I'd befriended. He was nervous, wiping sweat from his brow despite the air conditioning. "Mike, you were right about the demolition project," Greg whispered, sliding a folder across the table. "The soil tests were rigged. If we had gone through with the initial plan, half the foundation would have collapsed into a sinkhole. You saved my career." "I told you," I replied, sipping my drink. "Now, about Jennings Garden. Buy every available unit. Use your leverage. The city is going to approve the public transport expansion within 72 hours. "That's insider trading," Greg gasped. "No," I corrected him. "That's foresight. Do you want to be a small-time bureaucrat forever, or do you want to be the man who redeveloped the city?" 3 days later, Zoe Grant's birthday party was the epicenter of high society. The elite of Jarrell were all there, dripping in diamonds and posturing for influence. I arrived in a suit that cost more than my old apartment. With Zoe on my arm, the moment we walked in, the room went quiet. "Look," someone whispered. "It's the Oracle. And he's with Zoe Grant." Tate Colson was there, holding court. He saw me, and his eyes narrowed. He was waiting for a chance to humiliate me, to show Zoe that I was nothing compared to his pedigree. He approached us, holding a box with a $10 million diamond ring. "A birthday is a time for luxury, not tricks," Tate said, opening the box to show off the gargantuan blue diamond. "Let's see what the Oracle brought." "A fortune-telling scroll? A lucky pebble?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out the set. The imperial green emerald jewelry, crafted into a necklace that seemed to hold the very heart of the forest. The room gasped. Even the experienced jewelers in the back stepped forward, their mouths agape. It's the imperial green from the expo," one whispered, "but it's being carved by a master. That piece alone is worth 30 million. Tate's ring looked like a glass toy in comparison. He went rigid, his face turning an ugly shade of plum. You had that carved? In 3 days?" Efficiency is key when you have the right connections, I said, putting thin necklace around Zoe's neck. Tate, you spent your life building an empire on the foundations of privilege. I've spent the last 3 days building one on the foundations of stone. We aren't playing the same game. I leaned in close so only he could hear. By the way, check your stock portfolio tomorrow morning. Your tech holdings are about to take a dive you won't recover from. The look on his face was the real birthday present. Should I move to the financial war arc? Chapters 16-20, where Mike begins to dismantle the Coulson family empire and reveal his final status to the Grant family patriarch. Tate Coulson spent the entire night laughing off my warning. He held his champagne high, leaning into the crowd to mock my empty threats. But as the sun rose, the reality of the market hit him like a freight train. I sat in my home office, my monitors glowing with the red bleed of a market crash. The Coulson family's primary tech holding, Blast Tech, had been exposed. I had leaked the internal audit showing that they had been falsifying their R&D success rates for years. By 9 a.m., their stock had dipped by 20%. By 10 a.m., it was suspended. My phone rang. It was an unknown number, but I knew who it was. What did you do? Tate's voice wasn't arrogant anymore. It was a frantic, high-pitched tremor. I know it was you. The audit, that was internal. Only 3 people had access. Information is the only currency that never depreciates, Tate, I said, leaning back. You bet against the Oracle. Now, watch as your dynasty turns to dust. While the Coulson empire burned, I was summoned to the Grant family manor. Melvin Grant, Zoe's father, greeted me at the door. His usual condescension was replaced by a rigid, forced politeness. He had seen the news. He knew who was holding the torch to the Coulson house. Mr. Cohen, he said, gesturing toward the study, I believe I've been misinformed about your capabilities. You've been blinded by pedigree, Mr. Grant, I replied, walking past him. You wanted a man of status. You forgot that status is something you earn, not something you inherit. He didn't argue. He couldn't. He had seen the brokerage statements. He knew Ehud liquidated $50 million worth of real estate assets just to buy into the Coulson crash. I was no longer a farmer's son. I was the most dangerous man in the city. Megan was waiting outside the manor. She looked disheveled, her expensive clothes wrinkled, her eyes frantic. She had heard the rumors. She had realized that the broke loser she dumped was the man the entire city was now begging for mercy. Mike, she screamed as I exited the manor. Mike, wait, we can talk. You still love me, don't you? We have history. I stopped. I didn't look at her. I looked at the security guard standing near the gate. Is this woman on the guest list? No, sir, the guard replied. Then remove her. Mike, you monster, she shrieked as she was dragged away. You're the same peasant you've always been. You'll rot for this. I watched her go. The woman who had left parents to suffer in their final months of need was now a footnote in my history. It felt like breathing fresh air after years of drowning. Later that evening, I sat with Zoe on the patio overlooking Jarrell. The city lights twinkled like distant dying stars. You knew, Zoe said softly, looking at me. You knew everything that would happen. The bowl, the emerald, the market crash. You aren't just a stock prodigy, are you? I'm a man who learned the hard way that life is a series of patterns, I said. If you know the patterns, you can predict the outcome. She took my hand. My father is terrified of you now. He doesn't know whether to treat you as a son-in-law or a corporate boogeyman. He'll learn, I said, because soon the Grant family won't just be one of the top families in Jarrell. They'll be the only one standing. The last piece of my old life was the pyramid scheme that had swallowed my parents' money and nearly ruined my future. I had tracked down the offshore accounts where the Coulson family, who had been funding Luke's schemes, kept their black book records. I sent a single email to the federal prosecutor's office. It contained the digital signatures of every Coulson executive involved in money laundering. As I pressed send, my phone chimed. It was an alert from the International Exchange. Nickel prices have surged. My bet on the market hadn't just succeeded. It had created a ripple effect that had essentially handed me the keys to the city's industrial sector. I wasn't just wealthy. I was the architect of the new Jarrell. I turned my phone off, leaned back in my chair, and for the first time in 2 lives, I finally slept without a plan. The story is now at a natural triumph point. Do you want to continue this into a new empire-building phase, or are you satisfied with this conclusion? I didn't sleep for long. True power isn't in reaching the summit. It's in staying there. With the Coulson dynasty in ruins and the Grant family effectively under my financial umbrella, the vacuum in Jarrell's economy was begging to be filled. The city was a wounded animal, and I was the only one with the medicine and the poison. I shifted my operations to the top floor of the Ward Tower. Tyler Ward, the president of Valley Bank, had become my most loyal lieutenant. He wasn't just a banker anymore. He was the vault keeper for my growing shadow empire. The Coulson assets are being liquidated, Tyler said, setting a tablet on my desk. The board is in chaos. They're begging for a buyout, but the price I pennies on the dollar. You could own their entire manufacturing arm by Tuesday. Buy it, I said, not looking up from the monitor. And Tyler, make sure the acquisition is done through a shell company. I don't want the Grant family or anyone else to know I own the Coulson factories. Not yet. 3 months passed. The transition was seamless. I didn't announce myself as the new king of Jarrell. I let the city believe that a mysterious international conglomerate had moved in. It kept the vultures away and the enemies guessing. I spent my afternoons mentoring the younger traders at Ward's Bank. I teaching them the oracle methods, not by fortune-telling, but by showing them how to read the systemic rot in balance sheets. But my past wasn't entirely buried. I received a package at the office. It was a simple, handcrafted wooden box, the kind my father used to keep his old carpentry tools in. Inside was a note, written in a shaky, familiar hand. The debts are paid, Mike. But the sins of the father, they're still collecting interest. My father, who had lived a quiet, humble life in the countryside, had never mentioned a family debt. I drove out to see him the next morning. The country air was sharp and cold. "Dad," I said, sitting on the porch as he whittled a piece of cedar, "who did you owe money to before the accident? Why was the consortium's interested in our family?" He stopped whittling. His hands, gnarled and scarred from decades of labor, trembled. "They weren't interested in the money, Mike. They were interested in the land we lived on. That property, it isn't just farmland. It sits on top of a massive rare earth mineral deposit. Your mother knew. That's why she left." The pieces clicked. The reparations from the accident weren't a settlement. They were a hush money payment to keep us from digging on our own property. I returned to Jarrell with a fire in my gut. If the consortium, or what was left of it, thought they could circle back to my family's land, they had another thing coming. I contacted Greg Summer again. "I need the mining rights for the eastern sector of the valley. Every acre." "Mike, that's protected land. The bureaucracy will take years to clear," Greg warned. "I don't have years," I said. "I have $5 billion and an oracle's knowledge of exactly which regulatory boards are taking bribes. Find the signatures. We're going to own the earth beneath their feet." That night, at a high-profile charity gala, I saw someone I never expected to see again. It was Clara Thorne. She wasn't in jail. She was draped in a silk gown, laughing with a group of overseas investors. She had aged. There were lines around her eyes and a nervous twitch in her hand, but she was free. I signaled to my security team, but she saw me. She didn't run. She walked straight up to me, a glass of champagne in her hand. "Surprised, Mike?" she whispered, her voice like grinding glass. "Julian took the fall. I had assets, enough to buy a very good legal team and a very quiet departure. You shouldn't have come back," I said, my voice barely audible over the music. "Oh, I'm not here for you," she smiled, a predatory glint in her eyes. "I'm here for the new kid. I heard you have a son. A sweet boy, isn't he? It would be a shame if he disappeared like his father." The air in the room seemed to vanish. She wasn't just a ghost of the past. She was a threat to my future. I didn't wait for the gala to end. I bypassed the valet, took my keys, and drove like a madman to the villa where Leo was staying under heavy guard. "They're moving." I barked into my phone, calling Marcus. "Clara Thorne is back. She's going after the boy. Lock down the villa. Now." "Mike, stay calm," Marcus said. "I've got eyes on her. She's meeting with a contact, a hitman known as the Architect. They're planning to hit the villa at 3:00 a.m. I looked at the dashboard clock, 1:45 a.m. "Give me the location of their meeting," I said. "If I'm going to end this, I'm not doing it in my own backyard." The warehouse was an abandoned shell near the port. I walked in, alone, unarmed, with only the cold, hard confidence of a man who knows exactly how the clock ticks. Clara was there, talking to a man in a trench coat. When she saw me, she didn't look afraid. She looked triumphant. "You're late, Mike," she laughed. "And you're alone." "Typical hero complex. I'm not a hero," I said, pulling my phone out. I tapped a button. Outside, the warehouse doors were slammed shut and welded shut by the team I'd hired. I'm a businessman. And in business, when a partner becomes a liability, you liquidate them. I hit another button, the fire alarm, but not for water. The sprinkler system began to mist a high-grade sedative gas I'd purchased from a black market pharmaceutical contact. What is this?" Clara gasped, clutching her throat. "The same medicine you gave me," I said, watching her drop to her knees. "Only this time, the dosage is correct." Clara Thorne hit the concrete floor with a thud, the sedative taking hold before she could even reach for her weapon. The Architect, a man who had made a career out of professional disappearances, didn't even have time to stand up. Hess stared at me through the thickening mist, his eyes glassing over. I didn't kill them. Death was too quick, too merciful for people who had spent years systematically trying to dismantle my soul. I stood over Clara. "You took my past," I whispered, "but you'll never touch my future." I walked out of the warehouse, locking the reinforced doors behind me. By the time the police, tipped off by an anonymous, untraceable file containing every single one of their illegal dealings, arrived, Clara and her hitman would be found in a state of chemically induced paralysis, surrounded by enough evidencito keep them in a black site prison for the rest of their natural lives. With Clara neutralized, the path to my father's land was clear. The geological surveys came back the next morning. The rare earth mineral deposit wasn't just a vein. It was a vein that could power the next decade of battery technology. I didn't celebrate with champagne. I sat in my office and drew up a contract. I wasn't going to sell the rights. I was going to build the infrastructure myself. I called Tyler Ward. "Tyler, liquidate every non-essential holding we have. We're going into manufacturing. I want the finest chemical engineers, the best geologists, and a security team that answers only to me." "That's a massive pivot, Mike," Tyler said, sounding breathless. "The market will think we're overextending." "Let them," I replied. "The market is a mirror. It only reflects what people think is valuable. I'm about to redefine value." The Grant family was not happy. Melvin Grant had been eyeing the mineral deposit for his own firm, and when he found out, I had secured the rights before he could Devon register his bid. He showed up at my office, unannounced. "You're playing a dangerous game, Cohen," Melvin said, slamming his hand on my desk. "That land was supposed to be a joint venture. You're cutting out the very Opal who gave you a platform." I stood up, walking toward him until I was inches from his face. "You didn't give me a platform, Melvin. You gave me a target. You bet against me, and you lost. And if you think your daughter's affection is enough to buy you a piece of my success, you're more delusional than Tate Colson." Melvin went pale. He had never seen this side of me, the side that didn't care about politeness, only outcomes. He left without another word, and I knew that the alliance with the Grant family was officially broken. The rift between Zoe and her father was immediate. She stood by me, but I could see the pain in her eyes. She was caught between the man she loved and the family that had raised her. "You don't have to choose him, Zoe," I told her that night. "I'm not choosing him," she replied. "I'm choosing my own path. My father has lived his life by the rules of the old boys club. He can't handle that the world has changed. It's about to change a lot more," I said. "I'm taking the company public, and when I do, I'm not just listing on the Jarrell exchange. I'm listing on the global index. I'm going to make the Grant family's holdings look like a neighborhood bake sale." The IPO was the largest in the history of the country. I stood on the balcony of the exchange, watching the ticker tape climb. $10 billion, $15 billion, $20 billion. Investors who had mocked me, analysts who had called me a peasant with a lucky streak, were now begging for a moment of my time. I had become the invisible hand guiding the local economy. But as the numbers climbed, I felt a strange emptiness. The money was a scorecard, but it wasn't the goal. I looked at the crowd below. The same types of people who had once spat on my father, and I realized my revenge wasn't just about the money. It was about proving that the system they used to crush people like me could be mastered and turned against them. My phone vibrated. It was a picture of Leo, sent by Martha. He was at the park, smiling, a bright, normal kid in a bright, normal world. I deleted the market apps from my phone. I didn't need to watch the numbers anymore. I had delegated the management to the team I'd built. "Mr. Cohen?" Tyler appeared at the door. "The board is waiting for your opening address." I stood up, adjusted my tie, and looked at my reflection. The man in the mirror was confident, powerful, and utterly secure. The man from 2004 who had been robbed of his life was gone. The address was short. I didn't talk about stocks. I didn't talk about nickel or earth minerals. I talked about foresight. I talked about how the future belongs to those who refuse to be defined by the mistakes of their past. As I walked off the stage, I saw Melvin Grant in the front row. He looked old, defeated. He stood up, hesitated, and then slowly began to clap. It was the hardest thing he'd ever done. I walked out of the exchange and into the golden light of the setting sun. My car was waiting. "Where to, sir?" the driver asked. "Home," I said. I wasn't the richest man in the world, and I wasn't the Oracle anymore. I was just Mike Cohen. And for the first time, that was more than enough. Here is the beginning of the legacy arc, where Mike discovers that even at the top, the game never truly ends. Life as the richest man in Carnea had a strange way of becoming routine. My life was now managed by algorithms, high-level assistants, and the constant hum of a billion-dollar machine that I had built from the ashes of my old life. But 3 months into my retirement, the silence of the villa was broken by an anomaly. It wasn't a market crash. It wasn't a scandal. It was a failure in the global supply chain, a very specific one. 3 of my shipping vessels carrying the raw earth minerals were seized in international waters by a private naval security firm I didn't recognize. I sat at my desk, the glow of the monitors reflecting in my eyes. Tyler, I sighed into the intercom, who handles the maritime security for the southern route. We use Vanguard, Mike. They've been with us since the IPO, Tyler replied. Check the Vanguard accounts. I want to know who bought their debt last week. 2 minutes later, Tyler's voice returned, and it sounded like he'd been punched in the gut. It was a holding company called Ouroboros. And Mike? Their registration address for the Ouroboros board is in a district that doesn't exist in any public map. I didn't panic. Panic was for people who didn't know the future. But this was something new. Ouroboros was a name I hadn't seen in my previous lifetimeline. It was a variable, a ghost in the machine. If they were seizing my ships, they weren't just after money. They were trying to strangle the supply of the rare earth minerals, effectively forcing me into a corner. I checked the stock market. Sure enough, there was a massive, coordinated short position against my company. Someone was trying to drive my stock price into the floor, hoping to trigger a margin call that would force me to sell my fuffuacturing plants at a fraction of their value. They want a war, I whispered, watching the ticker tape move. Fine, let's see how much they can bleed. I didn't call the police. I didn't call the International Maritime Authorities. Instead, I accessed the private server where I kept the Oracle files, the scraps of information I had held onto from my previous life. There was a folder I had ignored, labeled 1998 The Black Projects. I had assumed it was just a local political rumor. Now, I opened it. It detailed a secret agreement between the global elites of the 90s to create a shadow energy grid. The minerals I was mining were the missing link in that grid. Ouroboros wasn't just a competitor. They were the guardians of a secret that was decades old. I set a trap. I issued a public statement. I am holding an emergency auction for the mineral extraction rights on the Eastern Valley. The goal wasn't to sell. The goal was to see who showed up. At the auction, the ballroom was filled with the usual suspects, but in the back, tucked into a private booth, sat a man with a distinct silver cane. He didn't bid. He didn't drink. He just watched. I walked over to him. "You're Ouroboros," I said. The man looked up, his face lined with the weariness of 1,000 secrets. "We've been watching you, Mike Cohen. You're an anomaly. A man who shouldn't have the success you've had. You're an error in the timeline." "If I'm an error," I said, leaning over his booth, "then you're about to be corrected. You're playing with fire," the man with the cane said. "The energy grid we control isn't just about money. It's about power that hasn't been touched in 20 years. "I don't care about your grid," I replied. "I care about my supply line. You have 48 hours to release my ships and close your short positions. If you don't, I will release the entire Black Project folder to the public." The man smiled. It was a terrifying, hollow expression. "You think the public cares about 1998? You think they care about minerals? They care about the price of gas and their pension funds. If you tank the market by releasing that, you destroy your own wealth, too." "You're right," I said, standing up. "I will destroy my wealth, but I'll be the one holding the match. Can you say the same for your masters?" The scope of the story has now widened into a geopolitical thriller. Should we follow Mike as he initiates a scorched earth financial policy, or focus on the confrontation between him and the shadowy figures of the energy grid? The man with the silver cane didn't leave immediately. He watched me with a look of genuine curiosity, as if I were a laboratory specimen that had unexpectedly developed a lethal defense mechanism. "You're prepared to be poor again, then?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I wasn't poor," I replied, fixing my cufflinks. "I was just uninvested. I'll be fine." I walked out of the auction house without looking back. The moment I hit the parking lot, I dialed Tyler. Sell everything. Don't wait for the opening bell market orders. Empty the coffers. We're going to zero. Mike, that's hundreds of billions in value. I know, I cut him off. Do it. And while you're at it, initiate the data dump protocol. Release the Black Project files to every major news outlet, every government regulator, and every dark web forum that keeps tabs on corporate corruption. Do it now. By the time I reached my villa, the world was already in a state of terminal agitation. The Black Project files, a 20-year history of illegal energy cartels, bribery of state officials, and suppressed technology, went viral. Because I had dumped all my stocks simultaneously, the market had no time to digest the news. The indices didn't just drop, they evaporated. The global energy sector, the very lifeblood of the Ouroboros syndicate, was hit the hardest. Investors panicked, pulling liquidity from every sector. It was a digital wildfire. I stood on my balcony watching the night sky. In the distance, the city lights flickered, a power grid strained by the sudden instability of the markets. I had just vaporized my own net worth, but for the first time in either of my lives, I wasn't scared. The man with the silver cane, whose name I'd discovered was Victor Sterling, didn't go down quietly. A team of mercenaries attempted to breach the villa at 4 a.m. They were professionals, the kind of men who didn't exist on paper. But they had underestimated one thing: foresight. I had spent the last 24 hours converting my estate into a fortress. When they breached the perimeter, the automated security grids I'd installed, the ones designed by the best engineers money could buy, systematically pinned them down with non-lethal, high-frequency sound waves that rendered them unconscious within seconds. "They're captured," Marcus reported over the comms. "Do we hand them over to Thepolis?" "No," I said, looking at the screens. "The police are currently busy dealing with the riots and the corporate lawsuits I started. Take them to the underground facility. We're going to have a very long conversation." I sat across from the leader of the mercenary unit in my basement. He was shaking, not from fear of me, but from the realization that he had been abandoned by his employers. "Sterling left you behind," I said, sliding a glass of water toward him. "He knows I've got the files. He knows the grid is collapsing. He's already booking a flight to a country with no extradition laws. He told us you were just a lucky stock trader," the man rasped. "I am," I said. "But luck has a habit of favoring those who hold all the cards." "Where is he going?" "The private airstrip in the north. He's leaving at dawn." I didn't wait for dawn. I took my private jet, the one I'd kept fueled for Wicks, and beat him to the strip. The airstrip was nothing more than a strip of gravel in the middle of a forest. I parked my car directly in the middle of the runway, my headlights cutting through the darkness. Sterling's plane was taxiing, its engines screaming. When the pilot saw the car, he slammed on the brakes. I walked toward the plane, my shadow stretching long and menacing in the artificial light. I didn't need to shout. I just held up my phone, showing him aerial time feed of his own bank accounts being drained by a script I'd spent all night running. "You're not going anywhere, Victor," I said into the megawatt megaphone I had rigged to the car's roof. "And you're not taking the grid with you." Victor Sterling surrendered. Not because he was a coward, but because he saw the writing on the wall. The world he had helped build had been dismantled in less than a day. He handed over the codes to the shadow grid. I sat in the cockpit of his plane, looking at the data. I could have become the new ruler of the energy world. I could have been a god in a gray suit. But instead, I opened the main drive and hit delete. Then, I initiated a global upload that turned the grid's research into open-source property. Free energy for everyone. It was the only way to ensure that no one like Sterling, or me could ever hold it over the world again. I walked back to my car, the rising sun painting the forest in hues of gold and amber. My bank account was empty. My company was a shell. I was effectively bankrupt, but as I started the car, I felt something I hadn't felt since I was a poor kid in the countryside. I was free. I drove back to the city. I had a dinner date with Zoe in 3 hours. She didn't know I was broke. She didn't know I'd saved the world. And honestly, it didn't care. "Mike?" Zoe asked as she opened the door later that day. "You look different. You look like you just finished a marathon." "Something like that," I smiled, stepping inside. "The market was volatile today. I decided to change my career path." "Oh, what are you doing now?" I thought about the mineral deposit, the rare earth research, and the peaceful life I'd envisioned for my son. "I'm going to be a teacher, Zoe. I think I have a lot to teach people about how the world really works." She looked at me, her eyes filled with a love that had nothing to do with money or stocks. "I'd like that, Mike. I'd really like that." I closed the door on the world, and for the first time in my 2 lives, the oracle finally stopped predicting the future. I was going to live it.